Gray dawn veiled the silent village. No roosters crowed. No wind stirred the dust on the main path. Then the silence broke. A shape loomed from gloom. It was a gray silhouette, vast and still, blocking the path to the woods. It did not move. It did not make a sound. It simply stood there, a mountain of living muscle against the pale morning sky. The creature turned its head slowly, its trunk hanging limp toward the damp earth. Its eyes were fixed on the cluster of houses, unblinking and deep. Still, air pressed, unnaturally heavy. Silent sentinel watched dawn break. The first reaction was instinct. Doors slammed shut. Bolts slid into place with sharp, metallic clicks. Families huddled in the dim interiors of their homes, listening to the silence outside. They peered through the narrow gaps in their shutters, watching the gray mass that refused to leave. By the second day, the initial terror began to fray. The creature remained a permanent fixture at the village edge. On the third day, the fear curdled into a sharp, restless irritation. Men paced their floorboards, checking their locks. Women pulled children away from the windows, their faces tight with annoyance. The village elder stepped onto his porch, his knuckles white as he gripped his staff. "It is a bad omen," he muttered. The elder struck his staff against the wooden floor, a final, emphatic sound that echoed the growing resentment. On the fifth morning, the pattern shattered. The elephant stopped its rhythmic pacing. It turned, its massive frame shifting with a heavy, deliberate grace that made the ground tremble. It stalked the fence. Villagers watched, breathless. Scarred trunk hovered, then struck. A dull thud echoed, resonating. A third chime echoed, piercing the morning air. The trunk struck wood, a precise, urgent signal. Elephant met his gaze, stopped tapping. Square hummed. Neighbors warned. "Stay back, Ravi," someone shouted, but the words were thin, lost in the heavy air. Ravi did not turn his head. His focus remained anchored to the creature, whose dark, wet eyes held a clarity that defied the village's fear. The elephant stood motionless, its trunk curled inward, waiting with a patience that felt ancient. Ravi felt the wood of his porch beneath his boots. Then the cool, damp earth as he stepped down into the dust. Protests flared. He shrugged off grasping hands. Every step toward the fence felt like crossing a threshold. He walked past the last house, his pace steady, his heart hammering against his ribs. Ravi reached the fence, the rough timber pressing against his palm, and stood face to face with the giant. The village fell into a sudden suffocating silence. Massive frame turned, feet crunched earth. It took 3 steps, then paused, its ears flicking back to ensure Ravi was still there. Ravi glanced back, then faced the dark tree line. He grabbed his walking stick from the ground, the wood smooth and familiar in his grip, and followed. Tall grass whipped their legs, sunlight vanished, canopy knitted shut. Ravi walked with his head down, watching the massive indentations the elephant left in the soft soil. The air changed, replaced by the heavy, humid smell of dense vegetation. He kept his eyes on the gray, swaying tail ahead of him and stepped into the suffocating brush. The forest floor was a trap of slick mud and hidden roots. Ravi stumbled, his boot sliding sideways as he navigated the uneven terrain. The air here was stagnant, heavy with the cloying scent of damp earth and decaying leaves that clung to the back of his throat. Every breath felt like an effort. A thick, humid weight that dampened his skin and slowed his movements. The canopy above had woven itself into a solid ceiling, turning the afternoon light into a murky, bruised green. He reached out to steady himself against a trunk, but his hand came away slick with moss and black rot. Elephant's wet thud. Ravi's aching climb. He wiped sweat from his eyes, his vision blurring as he struggled to keep pace with the massive, gray shape that moved through the brush with deceptive ease. His walking stick sank inches into the soft, spongy ground, offering little support. He was miles from the village now, surrounded by a wall of tangled vines that seemed to close in behind him with every step. The isolation was not just a feeling. It was a physical pressure, pushing against his chest, demanding he turn back. He tightened his grip on the stick and pushed forward, deeper into the suffocating dark. The thicket suddenly broke, giving way to a sharp, downward slope. Ravi slid down the embankment, his boots skidding over loose shale and jagged stones. The forest floor had vanished, replaced by a narrow, winding ravine that cut deep into the earth like a fresh wound. The walls rose high on either side, slick with moisture and choked with tangled, thorny vines that blocked the remaining light. The air in the ravine was colder, smelling of minerals and trapped water. Ravi reached the bottom, his breath coming in short, sharp gasps. Giant elephants squeezed, then froze. A low, vibrating sound began to roll through the ravine, a deep, guttural rumble that bypassed Ravi's ears and settled directly into his bones. The elephant held its position, head lowered, waiting for Ravi to catch up to the edge of the shadow. Ravi stepped forward, his boots crunching against the damp shale. The elephant stood like a statue, its trunk pointing toward a dense wall of hanging vines that draped over a depression in the ravine floor. Ravi reached out, his fingers brushing against the rough, waxy surface of the leaves. He pulled them aside, expecting more rock, but the ground simply fell away. A narrow, deep pit opened up beneath the foliage, a jagged scar in the earth. He leaned over the edge, his heart hammering against his ribs. At the very bottom, huddled in the mud, lay a small calf. Still, dirt-caked flank rose, eyes half closed, filmed over with exhaustion. A thin, high-pitched whine drifted up from the pit, a sound so fragile it seemed to vanish before it reached the surface. Ravi gripped the edge of the ravine, his knuckles turning white. The calf let out a shuddering breath, its tiny legs twitching in a futile attempt to stand. The silence of the forest felt suddenly deafening, filled only by the labored, rattling sound of the calf fighting for air. Ravi looked at the massive elephant, then back at the pit. Ravi dropped to his knees at the edge of the pit, his hands clawing at the loose dirt. He reached down, fingers straining to touch the calf, but the bottom was too far, and the walls were too steep. He grabbed a protruding root, testing its strength, but the soil crumbled away under his weight, sending a shower of grit onto the calf below. The creature did not even flinch. It was too weak to react. Ravi pulled his hand back, his palms raw and trembling. He looked at the massive elephant standing guard, then back at the trap. The calf was heavy, trapped in thick, suctioning mud. Legs trembling, he scanned the escape route. He took one last look at the calf, the shallow breathing now the only sound in the ravine. He tightened his grip on his walking stick, turned his back on the pit, and began to run. He hit the slope, his boots finding purchase on the rocks as he started the long climb. Ravi tore through the brush, his lungs burning with every jagged breath. Branches whipped against his face, leaving thin, stinging welts. But he did not slow down. He vaulted over a fallen log, his boots skidding on the slick moss, and regained his footing with a desperate lunge. The forest floor blurred into a streak of brown and green. He pushed his legs until his muscles screamed, the rhythm of his heartbeat drowning out the forest sounds. He hit the edge of the village, clearing, and stumbled, his knees buckling, but he forced himself upright. He did not wait to catch his breath. He began to shout, his voice raw and cracking. "The pit! By the ravine! It is trapped!" The villagers looked up from their morning tasks, faces hardening with skepticism. Ravi grabbed the nearest man by the arm, dragging him toward the path. "Move! There is no time!" He pointed back toward the dark tree line, his chest heaving, his eyes wide with the intensity of what he had seen. The men hesitated, glancing at one another, but the desperation in Ravi's voice broke their resolve. They dropped their tools, grabbed ropes from the storage shed, and began to run toward the forest. The group tore through the final stretch of dense brush, their heavy boots thudding against the damp earth. Ravi led them, his chest heaving, until he skidded to a halt at the edge of the ravine. The men behind him collided, breathless and angry, their faces twisted with irritation at the long, grueling trek. One man started to speak, his voice sharp with questions, but the words died in his throat. The forest air here was unnervingly still. Ravi pointed a trembling finger toward the center of the clearing. The mother elephant stood motionless, a massive gray wall against the dark trees. She did not charge. She did not trumpet. She simply stood, her trunk lowered toward the hidden pit, her entire posture radiating a profound, heavy vigilance. The men froze. The confusion on their faces dissolved into raw, wide-eyed shock. They stared at the giant, then at the deep, narrow hole in the ground. Ravines hushed, calf's ragged breath. Ropes felt heavy. Ravi was the first to move, his voice cutting through the heavy air. "The ropes! Secure them to the oaks!" The men scrambled, their initial shock giving way to frantic, coordinated labor. They fanned out, hauling heavy coils of hemp toward the massive trees. The ground was slick with rot and damp moss, making every step a gamble. One man slipped, his boot sliding toward the edge, but he caught himself on a thick root and hauled his weight back up. They looped the ropes around the trunks, pulling the knots tight until the wood groaned. Above them, the light began to change. The sun dipped behind the western ridge, casting long orange fingers of light across the forest floor. Shadows stretched and deepened, swallowing the edges of the clearing. The urgency sharpened. If they lost the light, they lost the calf. They worked in a rhythm of grunts and strained muscles, bracing their feet against the uneven slope to test the tension. The ropes hummed as they pulled taut. They stood in a line, hands white-knuckled around the coarse fibers, staring down into the pit. The forest grew quiet, waiting for the final effort. Ravi signaled with a sharp nod. The men leaned back in unison, their boots digging deep into the soft, yielding soil. The rope went taut, vibrating with the sudden load. It groaned against the bark of the trees, a high, strained sound that cut through the forest. At the bottom of the pit, the calf surged upward. Its legs kicked, throwing up sprays of wet earth, but it did not rise. The mud held it with a relentless, liquid grip. The rope bowed under the weight, then stopped dead. Ravi felt the resistance travel up the fiber and into his shoulder, a dead, immovable pressure. He shouted for more force, but the men were already at their limit, their muscles trembling with the effort. Calf cries, mud pulses, sinking deep. They pulled again, a collective guttural grunt erupting from the line, but the rope remained locked in place. Ravi dug his heels into the ravine wall, the soil crumbling away beneath his weight. "Brace your feet!" he roared, his voice cracking. The men shifted, locking their knees and leaning back until their bodies formed a human chain of tension. Every muscle in their arms burned as they fought the weight of the calf and the thick, viscous suction of the mud. It felt as if the earth itself was pulling back, refusing to let go of its prize. Sweat poured down their faces, stinging their eyes, but no one let go. The slope was treacherous. With every heave, a shower of loose dirt slid down into the pit, burying the calf further. Ravi watched the rope, his knuckles white and bleeding from the friction of the hemp. The line vibrated, a low, ominous hum that signaled the breaking point. The men groaned, their boots sliding inches at a time toward the edge. They were locked in a stalemate against the mountain. Each man pushed his weight into the ground, muscles knotting, breath coming in ragged, desperate gasps. The mud held firm, a relentless adversary. Ravi saw the rope slacken for a fraction of a second. He did not wait for the others. "Now!" he screamed, his voice tearing through the humid air. The men surged backward, throwing their entire weight into the line. The rope snapped taut, biting into their palms. Down in the darkness, the calf found a thick, exposed root embedded in the ravine wall. It dug its hooves into the dirt, pushing with a sudden, violent burst of energy. The mud, once a liquid trap, finally gave way with a wet, sucking pop that echoed against the trees. The calf's head cleared the thickest layer of sludge. It thrashed, its front legs clawing at the loose earth, finding purchase where there was none before. The men felt the sudden shift in momentum and scrambled to keep the tension steady. They backed away from the edge, dragging the rope in rhythmic, desperate steps. The calf's body rose, its mud-caked frame scraping against the steep incline. It was moving, The wall of the pit, once an immovable barrier, began to crumble under the calf's desperate climb. Ravi watched, his breath held, as the small creature finally gained the leverage it needed to haul itself toward the surface. The final pull was a frantic, uncoordinated scramble. The calf's hooves scraped over the edge of the ravine, digging into the soft loam of the forest floor. It tumbled forward, landing in a heap of mud and tangled vines. For a heartbeat, there was only silence. The calf lay motionless, its sides heaving as it sucked in the cool, damp air. Then it twitched. It pushed its front legs out, trying to find a solid base on the uneven ground. Its knees buckled, and it collapsed back down, but it did not stay there. Again, it forced itself up, muscles trembling under the strain of its own weight. The men stood back, their chests rising and falling in unison, watching the small creature fight for balance. It found its footing, legs splayed wide, spine arched with effort. It shook its head, spraying a fine mist of dirt from its ears. Then it opened its mouth. A thin, high-pitched cry cut through the stillness of the trees. It was a sound of raw, piercing relief. The calf took one step, then another, its legs still spindly and uncertain, but moving forward. It stood there, on the grass, a small, mud-streaked survivor, trembling as it looked toward the shadows. The calf stumbled forward, its gait uneven, hooves clicking against the packed earth. The mother did not wait. She moved with a sudden, fluid grace, closing the distance between them in 3 long strides. She stopped inches from the calf, her trunk reaching out to explore the mud-caked hide. She moved with meticulous care, tracing the lines of the calf's back, checking for deep cuts or broken limbs. The calf leaned into the touch, its small frame vibrating with the contact. The mother lowered her head until their foreheads rested against one another. She let out a long, shuddering exhale, a sound that carried the weight of the entire day. The air around them seemed to ripple as she pressed her trunk firmly against the calf's flank, anchoring it to her side. The calf closed its eyes, its breathing finally slowing to match the rhythm of the mother's. The villagers remained frozen, their hands still gripping the discarded ropes. No one moved. No one spoke. The sun climbed over the horizon, casting a sharp, clear light across the edge of the village. The patch of trampled grass where the elephant had paced for days was now still. No gray silhouette blocked the view. No rhythmic thud of a trunk against the fence disturbed the morning air. The perimeter was empty. Ravi walked the line of the fence, his boots crunching on the dry earth. He stopped at the spot where the elephant had first tapped the wood. He looked out toward the dense, dark wall of the forest. The trees stood silent, their leaves motionless in the early breeze. The path the animals had taken was already beginning to fade, the tracks obscured by the shifting shadows of the canopy. The village was quiet, but the atmosphere had shifted. The doors were open. The shutters were pulled back. The forest had taken back its own, leaving the village to face the new day with a strange, lingering sense of space. Ravi reached up, his fingers finding the rough, frayed fibers of the rope still coiled over his shoulder. The texture was coarse against his skin, still stained with the dark, dried mud of the ravine. He gripped the coil, feeling the weight of it, and looked once more toward the deep green wall of the forest. He remembered the sound of the calf's cry, a thin, desperate noise that had cut through the silence of the woods. He had been a man who mended nets alone, believing that independence was the only measure of a man. But the memory of the team, the collective heave of the men, and the sight of the mother pressing her trunk to her young changed that. He understood now that the loudest cries were the ones made in silence, and that the strongest beings were not those who stood apart, but those who knew exactly when to reach out for help. He let the rope slip from his hand, turned his back to the forest, and walked toward the village.